Ian was the most powerful mage in the Empire, so powerful that even the Emperor feared his growing power and strength. The Emperor himself poisoned Ian, hoping to get rid of him forever. But our hero had a trump card up his sleeve, a dagger imbued with forbidden time magic. Ian used this last chance to go back in time. Gathering his last strength, he completed the spell, and everything plunged into darkness. A moment ago, he was a dying mage. Now, he's just a boy on the street, though he still possesses the power and knowledge of an 8th circle mage. He quickly sits up and feels his chest, but there is no trace of the dagger, and he doesn't even feel any pain. Suddenly, a familiar gentle voice calls him, demanding to know if everything is all right. It is Ian's mother, Vanessa Page. Looking at her, Ian's eyes widen in shock, unsure of how to respond, as his mother has been dead for years. Quickly, he grabs his mother's hand, the hand he hasn't held for years, to make sure whether this is the afterlife or if the spell actually worked. Looking around, he tries to understand what is going on. There are children lined up for the examination, and soldiers from the castle are managing the crowds. He scans the surroundings, and realization hits him hard. He spots the flag of the ivory tower waving in the corner. He gazes at his small hands, finally certain that he has gone back 30 years into the past. A moment flashes in Ian's mind, himself standing with a man holding his staff during the Mana Reactions examination. It's a test all children of the Green River Empire undergo when they turn 12, a mandatory procedure designed to identify and nurture exceptional mages. First, they are assessed for a mana brain, the factor responsible for manifesting magic. Then, they are tested for a mana heart, which governs the production, circulation, and storage of mana. Any child found to possess both traits is immediately accepted into the Academy of Magic and granted noble-level authority upon graduation. Ian never expected to find himself time-traveling 30 years back. He thinks of his dagger engraved with the language of dragons. He had spent his life researching it along with time magic and had activated the spell just before his death. Ragnar was Ian's closest friend. Ian had done much to help Ragnar over the years, but in his loyalty, Ian had also killed thousands for Ragnar, and in the end, Ragnar repaid him by taking his life. Ian can't let that happen again. To prevent it, he needs to regain all the power and authority he once held as an 8th-class mage. With that in mind, Ian promises his mother that he'll return soon. Ian approaches a knight, introduces himself, and is instantly recognized as Vanessa's son. The knight permits him to pass. As Ian enters the tent, Marco, a mage, is sitting in his chair, exhausted. He sighs at Captain Aaron, questioning how many more children he has to assess. Captain Aaron responds that there's at least half a day's worth of children left. The moment Ian steps into the tent, Marco's tired expression shifts to a warm smile. He sends a wave of mana toward Ian's head, warning him that he might feel a little dizzy. When Ian hesitates, Marco informs him that he's detected a mana brain within him and that he'll need to check for a mana heart as well. Ian, however, surprises the mage by saying he has something to show him. Marco, confused, allows him to proceed. Ian takes a deep breath, and within moments, a fiery orb appears in one hand. With a focused look, Ian combines the fire spell with a water spell. Marco's eyes widen in disbelief as he watches Ian effortlessly cast 2 opposing spells at once. After showing off his abilities, Ian casually mentions that he's been able to do this for a while now. The captain and the knights present are stunned. Marco, still in disbelief, asks if someone taught him this. Ian denies it, saying no one did. Suspicious, Marco presses again, using his interrogation magic, which checks a person's biological reactions, like their heartbeat, to determine if they're lying. Marco warns that if Ian is lying, he could be charged with treason. Despite the threat, Ian remains calm and assures Marco that he would never lie to a noble mage like him. Marco chuckles and uses his magic, which reveals Ian is telling the truth. This only increases Marco's curiosity, leaving him wondering just what kind of child Ian really is. Suddenly, a woman's scream cuts through the air. Ian's heart races as he looks outside the tent, only to be stunned by the scene before him. His mother is being roughly dragged by the same knight who had let Ian in. Vanessa pleads, clearly terrified, while the knight, in a cruel attempt to justify his actions, claims she was loitering where she shouldn't be, calling her a lowly peasant woman. The knights, including Captain Aaron and Marco, rush outside to investigate. The knight continues to lie, but Ian's fury ignites as he hears the words. Just as he's about to act, Marco gently taps his shoulder, calming him down. Marco steps forward, addressing the group. He elaborates that this child has just demonstrated that he possesses both the mana brain and mana heart, meaning he and his parents are of the same standing as nobles in their empire. Insulting a noble or mage is tantamount to challenging the authority of the imperial family and the ivory tower. The knight's actions, therefore, amount to treason, punishable by execution. The knight immediately drops to his knees, begging for mercy. Ian, however, turns to his mother and says the apology is for her, not him. He kneels before the knight, warning him that he will always keep a close eye on him. Later, Ian expresses his gratitude to Marco for intervening. Marco, with a knowing glance, instructs Captain Aaron to ensure that Ian and his mother are protected for the time being. Aaron leads them to an inn where the knights are staying. As they leave, Marco watches them go, his thoughts heavy. He realizes that Ian is far more talented and intelligent than any child he's encountered. He's certain the ivory tower and the imperial family will be stunned by news of such a mage. That same night, the knight who had misbehaved with Vanessa was walking down the street, still exuding arrogance. He had no shame, especially when he openly called Ian's mother a lowly peasant woman. But little did he know, a figure in a cloak was trailing him from behind, listening to every word he murmured. It was none other than Ian. With a focused thought, Ian cast his paralyze magic, freezing the knight in place. Ian then faced him calmly, reminding him that he would be keeping a watchful eye on him. The knight's breath quickened, fear starting to take hold of him. Ian added, in a cold tone, how the knight had been disgraced by the son of a lowly peasant woman. He then fabricated a story, claiming that the knight had gotten drunk and drowned. The moment the words left Ian's lips, he shoved the knight off the bridge, sending him tumbling into the rushing waters below. Ian stood there, watching him drown, reflecting on how the knight's fate had unraveled. He couldn't help but wonder about his own past, how he'd spent years researching draconian magic to turn back time, to fix his mistakes. But now he realized that such a thing was impossible. To protect what mattered to him, Ian swore he would do whatever it took. He watched the knight struggle in the water and murmured to himself. He would resent him if need be, but forgiveness wasn't necessary. This was the same sentiment Ragnar had shared with him after poisoning Ian. At that moment, Ian finally began to understand why Ragnar had said those words. Back in the inn, Ian sat with his hand against his aching head. He hadn't realized that using so much mana would drain him. His focus then shifted to his mother, who was peacefully sleeping beside him. He knew what the future held. In his past life, when he had become a first-class mage, his mother had passed away from a disease that very same year. All Ian wanted now was a long and healthy life with her. In his previous life, he had lost everything, but this time, he vowed not to let that happen again. The next morning, inside the royal palace, Emperor Terry sought the advice of Master Herbert Lane. Herbert explained that mana was a natural energy, and once someone learned to control it, they were considered a mage. The methods to stimulate the mana brain and the techniques to manifest magic were usually taught by academy teachers. That's how most mages learn their craft. However, news had reached him that a boy named Ian had learned to control mana on his own without a teacher. Herbert elaborated further, stating that Ian had even cast first-class magic, just like the primal mage, an ancient mage who had mastered magic in a time when no other mage existed. Terry listened intently, curious but skeptical, thinking Ian might be bluffing, but Herbert reassured him, stating that the tales of the primal mage were not just myths. If this boy truly had such abilities, he could be dangerously talented. Herbert felt he needed to see Ian for himself to confirm whether the rumors were true. As their conversation came to a close, Terry summoned Hayden Green River, the Crown Prince. Hayden approached and politely asked the reason for being called. Terry reminded him that it had been 5 years since Hayden had last left the Imperial Palace. Back then, he had gone out to inspect the famine's severity, but now it was time for him to go on another journey. Terry explained that he was granting Hayden command of the Knights of the Second Imperial Order, 300 soldiers and 3 third-class mages. His mission was to travel to Mogrian and bring back the boy named Ian Page. Hayden hesitated, but after Terry suggested he assist someone else, Hayden nervously agreed to the task. Later, Herbert, eager to begin, asked for permission to leave as well. He needed to start venturing out now, for if he didn't persuade the right people soon, he feared he wouldn't even be able to select 3 mages to accompany the Crown Prince. Terry chuckled and gave him permission to go. The moment Herbert stepped out of the hall, a young slave approached him and asked if he was returning to the tower. Herbert's expression darkened, and he revealed that he had someplace else to go first. The next day, Ian waited, fully aware that both the Imperial family and the Ivory Tower must be on the move by now. A flashback of Marco crossed his mind. Considering that Marco had declared Ian a mage right after the examination, it seemed highly likely that he had immediately reported Ian's abilities to his superiors. But no matter who was involved, whether it was the Emperor, the Tower Master, or even some third party, he knew one thing for certain: this time, he would not be a disposable pawn. A few moments later, an announcement echoed outside Ian's house, calling for Ian Page to come forward and receive an order directly from His Majesty, the Emperor. Ian flinched at the sudden proclamation. When he looked out the window, he saw Marco standing there with his subordinates. Marco, noticing Ian, smiled and wasted no time getting to the point. He explained that His Majesty had sent an imperial decree for Ian. With that, Marco instructed Ian to kneel on his right knee and place his left hand over his chest. Ian followed the instructions without hesitation, though he couldn't help but feel something familiar about the gesture. Marco, ignoring his own odd sense of recognition, extended his hand, holding a crystal sphere. A command appeared within it, sent directly from the Emperor himself. The Emperor approved of Ian's talent and nominated him as a Mage of the Empire. The decree went on to grant Ian permission to have his name carved into the Ivory Tower's Hall of Mages. Terry, the Emperor, also informed Ian that his firstborn son would accompany him to the palace. The Emperor wished for Ian to have a safe and enjoyable journey with his son's company. As the decree concluded, Ian slowly stood, understanding that the Emperor's intentions were crystal clear. One of the knights, Arnold, approached Marco with a request to escort Ian to Lord Mogrian's castle. Marco granted permission with politeness, and soon after, Arnold stepped forward. He knelt slightly, announcing that he had been granted the honor of serving Ian while he was at Mogrian. The journey continued, and they eventually arrived at the Mogrian Empire, finally reaching Marcus Mogrian, the Lord of Mogrian's castle. As the carriage pulled up, Marcus immediately warned Lavi and Margaret to treat the noble mage with the utmost respect. The castle's inhabitants gathered outside, eagerly watching Ian dismount from the carriage, helping his mother as she stepped down beside him. As they approached, Marcus greeted them warmly. 15 days passed, and rumors began to spread among the servants. They claimed to have seen the young boy at the training hall, where he was reportedly casting fire from his hands. He hadn't left the hall for 15 straight days. Inside the training hall, Ian was still focused on his training. He cast another spell, watching as the ground froze beneath him, but it still wasn't enough. He was acutely aware that his body was still too young, and he needed to make up for his limited mana. Just as his mind began to wander, the butler hurried in, breathless and panicked. With urgency, he begged for Ian's help, revealing that Lord Margarine had gone out to hunt goblins the previous day and hadn't returned since. They had searched for hours, but still there was no sign of him. Ian found the situation strange. It wasn't time for Marcus to die yet. In his past life, Lord Mogrian had been assassinated by one of Green River's enemies just before the First Unification War, a war that wouldn't occur for several more years. His son, Lavi Mogrian, had fled when the war broke out and was later executed after its conclusion. Given the current circumstances, Ian reminded the butler of Marco, who was far more experienced than he was. However, the butler informed Ian that Marco had other duties to attend to and wasn't currently in Mogrian. Ian was now uncertain. Maybe his return had actually changed something, for mages assigned to specific domains rarely left their posts. Ian knew the advantage he held, he knew what would happen in the future. But if Lord Mogrian's untimely death changed the course of events, he could lose that advantage. These thoughts swirled in his mind as he considered the situation. But the butler's desperate plea for help pulled him back to reality. He knew he couldn't let such an event happen. He agreed to help, determined not to let this change the future he was striving to protect. Vanessa was filled with worry after hearing that Ian was heading into the mountains with the search party. Ian reassured her, promising that he'd be back soon. Meanwhile, Margaret rushed toward him, her eyes brimming with tears. She begged Ian to find her brother and father, offering him anything in return. As Ian listened, his gaze landed on the ring she was wearing, and he could sense mana emanating from it. Curious, Ian asked Margaret if she would lend him the ring, explaining that it would be crucial to his search. Without hesitation, she handed it over, and Ian quickly slipped it onto his finger. The moment he did, it felt familiar, just like it did in his past life. The ring was the Mogrian ring, a low-ranking artifact known for boosting the wearer's mana. It seemed that Lord Mogrian had given it to his daughter instead of his chosen successor. With the ring now in his possession, the group continued their search. They ventured deeper into the forest, and one of the knights pointed out where they had lost track of the missing people. Blood was splattered across the ground, and Ian asked if they had already disposed of the bodies. The knights told him there were no bodies, and they feared that the monsters might have taken them. Ian took a careful look at the scene. Dozens of goblins had been slain, indicating that there were likely hundreds more who had attacked the group. It dawned on him that there was no time to waste. Without hesitation, Ian raised his hand and summoned a wolf spirit. A magical array formed in the air, and a stream of energy radiated from it. The knights stared in awe as a loud howl echoed in the distance. Suddenly, a baby wolf materialized in front of them. Ian hadn't expected the wolf to be so small, but given his current mana, that was the best he could do. He commanded the wolf to track the scent of the blood, instructing the knights to follow it. Despite their reluctance, they complied. As they journeyed further into the deepening forest, Marcus continued to fend off the goblins with his staff. His head was injured, and blood was trickling down his face. Surrounded by goblins, he knew they were all on the verge of being overwhelmed. With little choice, Marcus ordered Lavi to go back to the castle and warn everyone. He told Lavi to inform them that the goblin hordes had taken Mount Marion and that they were all in grave danger. Just as Lavi was about to leave, his body trembled with fear. His eyes widened when he spotted a goblin leaping through the air, preparing to attack Marcus from behind. In a panicked voice, Lavi tried to warn his father, but before Marcus could react, a loud thud echoed in the air. Ian and his subordinates had arrived just in time. With a swift motion, Ian cast his Frost Nova spell, freezing the goblin in place and preventing the attack. Footsteps drew closer to Marcus, and the last thing he saw was Ian's face before everything went black. 2 days later, Marcus slowly opened his eyes, still in a daze, lying in bed. The haze in his mind made it hard to focus, but he could hear the faint sound of his daughter crying nearby. As his senses started to return, he sat up, still trying to process what had happened. His memories were foggy, and he couldn't quite recall everything from before. Margaret, seeing him awake, quickly rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face as she explained that Ian had rescued both him and Lavi. She sobbed, relieved yet worried, sharing that both Marcus and his brother had been bedridden for 2 days. Just then, Hogar burst into the room, his face filled with relief as he thanked God that Lord Margarine had finally woken. Marcus, still weak, asked about the other knights and his sons, his voice tinged with concern. Hogar, his expression turning somber, explained that they had lost 12 men, including Sir Rothan. Hearing this, Marcus' heart sank, and he immediately asked to speak with Ian in person. Later, in the training hall, Ian could hear a familiar voice calling his name. It was Hogar, coming to inform him that Lord Margarine had woken up. Hogar believed that Marcus had something important to discuss with Ian. Out of curiosity, Ian decided to leave his training session. As he walked toward his office, he unexpectedly ran into both Marcus and Lavi. Ian greeted them with a warm smile, asking about their condition. Lavi, filled with gratitude, thanked him profusely for saving both of them. Marcus, too, offered his heartfelt thanks on behalf of everyone. He then gestured to a box on a nearby table, explaining that after some thought, he believed this might be one way to repay Ian for everything. Without hesitation, Ian opened the box, his eyes widening in surprise. Inside was the same mana ring that he had once lent to Margaret. Marcus, looking a bit sheepish, admitted that Margaret had told him everything about it. He had thought it was just an old family heirloom, but now he asked Ian if it held any special power and whether it might be of use to him. Ian nodded thoughtfully, revealing that the ring amplified the wearer's mana, a crucial tool for eliminating mountains. Marcus, pleased with this answer, handed the ring to Ian, saying it should serve as a token of his gratitude. Ian, puzzled by the word token, asked Marcus to explain further. Marcus, with a solemn tone, explained that the ring would symbolize an oath to Ian. From this moment on, Ian Page would be an honored guest of House Mogrian, and should Ian ever need their help, they would be at his service. He swore on the northernmost stream of the Emerald River that he and his descendants would uphold this vow for as long as Ian's line continued. With that, both Lavi and Marcus bowed slightly in respect. Later, as Ian and the knights made their way through the forest toward Lloyd Village, Ian's thoughts drifted back to a conversation he'd had earlier with Marcus. He had asked about any alchemists who might be able to create elixirs, to which Marcus had mentioned an alchemist named Wraitho. Ian had never heard of Wraitho before in his past life, but he hoped that this alchemist would be able to help him create an elixir to compensate for his lack of mana. Just as Ian was lost in thought, his attention was suddenly caught by the sight of Lloyd Village in the distance. The entire village was engulfed in flames, a horrible sight that sent a chill down his spine. As the knights drew closer, they realized that bandits had attacked the village. Not only had the homes been set on fire, but the villagers were being mercilessly slaughtered. One bandit, wielding an axe and clearly the leader, shouted orders to his men, urging them to hurry and grab the children, taking whatever they could. The bandits seized a young boy named Douglas, and when his father attempted to intervene, he was knocked to the ground. The leader of the bandits, seeing that the boy wasn't compliant, decided to make an example of his father. Without hesitation, he raised his weapon and approached the man lying on the ground, prepared to kill him. He promised the boy's father that Douglas would be sold off at a good price elsewhere. As the leader prepared to strike the final blow, Douglas screamed in terror, desperate to reach his father. But just as he did, something happened that left him in stunned silence, his screams of horror dying in his throat. Abruptly, a spike of ice shot through the bandit leader's body, killing him instantly. The remaining bandits screamed in terror, completely baffled by the origin of the ice. But as they realized where it had come from, panic set in, and they ran for their lives. However, Ian wasn't about to let them escape so easily. With a flick of his wrist, he sent sharp ice skates plummeting downwards toward the fleeing bandits. No matter how fast they ran, they couldn't outrun the cold, and one by one, they all met their end. Ian's eyes shifted toward the ring on his finger, his thoughts briefly interrupted by the sight. The ring was doing its job well. With it, his mana now rivaled that of a third-class mage. The fire had been extinguished, and people were visibly relieved. Still, Ian's mind lingered on a darker thought. He felt deeply saddened by the tragedy that had unfolded here. Just then, Captain Arnold spotted him and made his way over. Ian asked if any soldiers had been hurt, to which Arnold let out a relieved sigh. All of them were unscathed. Ian allowed himself a small sense of satisfaction at this, but his relief was fleeting. His thoughts returned to the man he had come here for, wondering if he had survived. Before he could dwell on it further, a voice rang out, calling Wraitho. It was the name of the man Ian had been searching for, the father of Douglas. Wraitho had been knocked out by the bandits and was now in critical condition. Douglas stood at his side, crying and calling out his father's name. Ian hurried over, gently reassuring Douglas that he would take a look at Wraitho. As Ian examined him, he could immediately tell something was off. Wraitho's skin had turned unnaturally pale, his hair stark white. The signs pointed to one thing: mana poisoning. It was clear that Wraitho couldn't have injected mana into his body on his own, meaning a mage with ill intentions had done this to him. His condition was dire, and Ian knew that time was running out. Without wasting another moment, Ian placed 2 fingers on Ratho's forehead, focusing his mana into him. The process was delicate, but it worked instantly. The man's breathing steadied, and color returned to his skin. As Ian moved a step away, Douglas grabbed hold of Ian's cloak, stopping him. He demanded to know how his father was doing. Ian didn't sugarcoat it. He told Douglas that Raphael would be okay for now, but the mana Ian had given him wouldn't last forever. Eventually, the mana residue would build up again, and Ratho would have to make a choice: either continue receiving mana injections for the rest of his life, or die. The truth hit Douglas hard. Tears welled in his eyes, and he sobbed uncontrollably. He vowed to find the Landiner flower to cure his father. Ian's mind clicked into place as he remembered the name of one of Green River's most brilliant alchemists, Douglas Mon, the Imperial Alchemist. In his past life, Douglas had despised and doubted mages, which now made sense. Ian pieced the situation together: an alchemist poisoned by a mage, a rare herb sought in the north, and a poison designed to neutralize mana. His memories fell into place like puzzle pieces. Before he could process it further, Ian turned to Douglas. It was clear that the boy would do something reckless if left to his own devices. Ian used his magic to put Douglas to sleep, gently easing him into unconsciousness. Once Douglas was resting, Ian carried him to a nearby tree and set him down carefully. As Ian observed the boy, a strange feeling came over him. Douglas looked exactly as he had in his past life, though this time without the hostile aura. Despite knowing that Douglas was the one responsible for the poison Ian had drunk, Ian couldn't bring himself to simply end his life now. This boy would become the greatest alchemist in history. Perhaps making him an ally was the right choice, but there was no guarantee that he wouldn't betray Ian at some point. Before Ian could fully consider his next move, Arnold appeared, catching up to him. He had seen Ian run off and wanted to make sure he was okay. Arnold's gaze shifted to the unconscious boy lying against the tree. Ian sighed and explained that the boy was from the village and he had put him to sleep for his own safety. Ian then suggested Arnold take Douglas back while he took care of some business elsewhere. Arnold gave a reluctant nod, clearly wanting to ask more but trusting Ian's judgment. He moved to lift Douglas, preparing to carry him back. Meanwhile, Ian turned away, his mind racing with the events that had just unfolded and the uncertain future ahead. The night had fallen, and Ratho, upon waking up, immediately came to sit beside Douglas's bed, asking him if he was asleep. Not even moving a bit, Douglas let him know, not yet. When Ratho noticed Douglas's cold behavior, he tried talking to him, informing him that Barton told him some mage came to their village to save them. In addition to that, he also said that Douglas almost got himself in trouble. Not able to face his father, Douglas tiredly explained he was just trying to find the flower. Upon hearing this, his father scolded him, demanding to know what he was thinking, as he could have gotten himself kidnapped by bandits. Douglas couldn't control his anger anymore, so he jumped up, questioning Ratho. What was he even supposed to do then? That mage said that Raphael was going to be sick for the rest of his life. Raphael narrowed his eyes, assuring his son that he was absolutely fine, but they just had to find the land flower. The tears Douglas was trying to control now fell from his eyes. He sobbed for his dying father. They had been searching for over a year, and they still hadn't found it. Douglas now even doubted its existence. Suddenly, outside from Ratho's house, a voice broke in, assuring them it does exist. Both Ratho and Douglas were stunned by the sudden voice. Scared, Ratho called out toward the door, confirming who it was. It was none other than Ian. He had returned, admitting he had overheard them looking for Landier flowers. Upon hearing Ian's words, Ratho ended up opening the door. He was surprised to see a young boy visiting their house. Ian greeted them and took permission to come in. As he stepped inside, lowering his cloak, Douglas was in shock, seeing the mage from earlier. Though Ratho had no idea about it, Ian introduced himself while placing a crystal on a nearby table. Ratho examined the crystal, realizing it was the Landier flower. Ian promised to give him this flower only if he answered Ian's question. Without hesitating, he began to question him without waiting for Ratho's response. How did Ratho know what this herb could do? There were only a few people who knew about this flower's medicinal uses. Ratho hesitated a bit but revealed he read about it in a guidebook. Ratho showed Ian that guidebook, elaborating that his father had handed this medicinal herb guidebook down to him. Flipping through a few pages, Ratho pointed to a page for Ian. The book contained notes about the landier flower, describing that it restores mana equilibrium and is only found in the northern part of the continent. 12 petals, all a dark violet color, and the blue leaves and stem are poisonous. The plant withers the moment it leaves the place it's rooted. Out of curiosity, after reading it, Ian questioned Ratho if his father had studied alchemy too, and learned it was a family business, meaning this guidebook was a family heirloom. Ian reminded him that if he knew this flower could neutralize mana, then he must also be aware of what this does to mages who possess a mana heart and a mana brain. It could be used as a deadly poison. Raphael flinched. Hearing this, he understood where Ian was getting at, but he assured Ian that alchemists from his family would never make an elixir to harm a person. He could swear that on the name of Hammon. As those words settled in his mind, Ian glanced at Douglas and thanked Ratho for answering, apologizing at the same time. While picking up the crystalline flower, he began to remove the ice magic, allowing the flower to return to its original form, but he couldn't save it either. The best he could do was keep it from wilting by freezing it. Seeing this, Ratho suspected him of tricking them, but Ian simply clarified that he was trying to show he could help him find the landier flower at any time. In that case, he needed to make a deal. Ian would regularly inject mana into his body so he wouldn't lose his life from mana poisoning. He also offered to help him with his research on landier so Ratho could use it for medicine. In return, he would like Ratho to come to the capital with him. Ian was clever enough to offer him this, as he would be able to find the records of the poison Ragnar and Douglas had used in his past life. Hearing the favor, Ratho didn't understand his purpose for going back to the capital, so Ian elaborated further. He would like Ratho to manufacture mana elixirs that could replenish a mage's mana and create medicine for his frail mother. Before Ian could finish, Ratho interrupted, apologizing but suggesting Ian assist a more well-known alchemist. After all, he was the mage of the empire. However, Ian confessed that what he was looking for was someone to stay with him and manufacture custom-made elixirs. He reminded Ratho that his son had run into the dangerous forest without hesitation to find the herb to heal his disease, so, for the sake of his safety and well-being, Ian hoped Ratho would make the right choice. Ratho was now aware that this child was no ordinary mage and asked for some time. Ian gave him some time and looked at Ratho talking to his son, promising himself, in this life, Douglas will not lose his father. He also won't have to become a slave. And most importantly, I will never let him fall into Ragnar's hands. Waiting outside Ratho's house, Captain Arnold approached Ian, informing him about finishing the preparations for their journey back to the castle. Upon receiving this information, Ian glanced at Ratho's house, sighing sadly, assuming Ratho hadn't made up his mind yet, and decided to head back. Unexpectedly, the door of Ratho's house creaked open. Ratho and his son stepped out of the house carrying their luggage. Douglas was startled to see a mage waiting for them outside their house. Immediately, Ian approached them to confirm if Ratho had come to a decision. Ratho scratched his head, admitting it wasn't like he had a choice in the first place, as he had a disease to beat, so he hoped Ian would keep his end of the bargain. Ian assured him, but they were interrupted when Douglas asked Ian if he could really make his dad's disease go away. Ian's promise filled Douglas with excitement, and he eagerly sought permission to address him as captain. It confused Ian, but he allowed it, though a picture of the older Douglas came to his mind, making him uneasy, wondering if this was what Douglas had been like as a child. Suddenly, a horse galloped toward them. A knight quickly informed Ian about the need for his immediate presence at Lord Mogrian's castle. Not being aware of the problem, Ian demanded to know the reason. The knight explained urgently, the Crown Prince had crossed the Gamus River. This was confusing, they had received the message just that morning, so why hadn't they informed them earlier? Ian then requested the knight to lend him the horse. Using his taming skill, he instructed the horse to go to Mogrian Castle with him. The horse immediately obeyed and knelt down. Sitting on the horse, Ian guided Arnold to escort Ratho to the castle, though both Ratho and Arnold looked at the horse's behavior in astonishment. Back to 2 days earlier, when the escort of Prince Hayden had just crossed the Gamus River. Inside the carriage, Prince Hayden glanced out the window. His mind wandered with thoughts. He recalled the conversation he had with his father, Terry, before this journey. Terry had called Hayden into his office. He wanted to tell Hayden something before he went. He had heard that Master Herbert had been seeing the fifth prince quite often these days. Many nobles tended to follow the ivory tower's lead, thus, the person whose side the tower master took would gain the support of those nobles. And now Herbert had made it clear that he was supporting the fifth prince. Moreover, Ragnar, the fifth prince, was a very clever child. Terry was sure Ragnar would use the tower master to make many people his allies. That was why Hayden had to do everything he could to make Ian Page swear his loyalty to him. Terry insisted his son make Ian his ally and build a foundation for himself before the ivory tower intervened. Hayden felt pressured. He was troubled by the task ahead. Mage or not, Ian was still only a child. He wondered, what good will Ian be? There are dozens of mages in the ivory tower, and yet none of them are at my side. Years later, Ian called out to their daughter Johanna, asking her to come to them. Johanna smiled brightly, running to them and calling Ian Papa. Rage filled Hayden's eyes, thinking, how dare they support the fifth prince instead of me? I am the crown prince. He vowed silently, on the day he became emperor, he would get rid of all those treacherous fools. As Hayden was lost in his thoughts, the captain of the Second Imperial Order of Knights, Oliver Raywood, called out to him from outside, acknowledging it was a bit late, but suggesting they let Lord Mogrian know where they were. Hayden seemed uninterested, reminding him that they had already discussed this. Oliver politely advised that they would need time to prepare for Hayden's arrival and begged him to be more understanding. Out of curiosity, Hayden questioned Oliver if his family was one of Mogrian's vassals and how much time remained until they reached Mogrian. Oliver confirmed that his family served as a vassal and informed him they had 2 days left. That being said, Hayden thought 2 days would suffice and allowed him to let them know he was coming. He smirked, looking down on them, wanting to see how those who called themselves the Guardians of the North and the Empire's Shield prepared themselves to greet a member of the imperial family in such a short time. Although Oliver didn't like Hayden's attitude, he couldn't do much about it and obeyed his command. As soon as news of His Highness's arrival reached Mogrian Castle, Marcus was thrown into a frenzy of activity. He was both worried and drained, having not received a single word, which led him to believe the prince would arrive later than expected. Spotting Hogar, he urgently inquired whether the other families had arrived yet. Hogar quickly reported that all the families were present except for House McFerrin and House Raywood. He then asked about Ian's whereabouts. Hogar hesitated and then lowered his head, shaking it in denial. Marcus let out a weary sigh, fully aware that the situation was spiraling into chaos. A few moments later, a knight made an announcement about the arrival of the crown prince. As Prince Hayden was about to enter the castle, a nobleman asked Marcus about Ian's whereabouts. Just then, the sound of horse hooves grew louder in the distance. Ian appeared, panting and exhausted, nearly collapsed over the horse's saddle. He immediately apologized for being late. Marcus rushed to lift Ian down from the horse, assuring him it was fine and that he had arrived just in time. The nobles stood in shock, staring at the young mage who could barely maintain his balance. Marcus draped an arm around Ian's shoulder and explained that it was customary for those who had received an imperial order to take the place of honor and stand at the front. As he finished speaking, Ian and Marcus faced Hayden. It had been a long time since Ian had seen Prince Hayden, and the 3 magistes who accompanied him stood close. One of them, Cecilia, smiled at Ian, and he smiled back, though he knew well enough she was a spy from the Coldwood Empire. Later that evening, a grand banquet was held at the castle in honor of Prince Hayden's arrival. Oliver advised Hayden to avoid drinking too much, but Hayden coldly retorted that the wine was the only thing that actually tasted good here. He hated the banquet just as much as he disliked Ian. He urged Marcus to return soon and get some rest. Meanwhile, Cecilia, holding a glass of wine, wasn't focused on drinking. she couldn't understand why the Coldwood Empire would be interested in someone like Ian. Recently, she had received 2 orders from the Empire: first, to determine whether the rumors about Ian Pagage were true, and second, if they were, she was to take both Ian and his mother alive and return to Coldwood immediately. So Cecilia set off in search of Ian and eventually found him alone outside the training ground at Marcus Castle. To test his abilities, she silently approached him and cast countless sharp magic missiles at him. The spells struck the ground, but Ian remained unharmed. Cecilia stood frozen in place, stunned. Ian turned to face her, demanding to know who she was. Cecilia raised an eyebrow, asking if he couldn't tell, and introduced herself as a senior mage from the Ivory Tower. She added that her attack was just a greeting and mocked him for having such a temper. Before she could say more, Ian's expression darkened, and he addressed her by her full name, Cecilia Coldwalker. Cecilia flinched, taken aback by the mention of her full name, unable to comprehend how he knew it. Ian smirked, revealing that he knew exactly who she was. In his past life, it was his duty to seek out and eliminate all Coldwalkers hiding in the Empire. He challenged her to name her other comrades. She urged him to stop, but Ian took a step forward, naming several spies: Yahl, the stable keeper on Mullion Avenue; Robin, the Imperial Secretary; Ariel from the Border Defense Squad, 9th Infantry; and Isabel, the head maid of the Imperial Villa. He then challenged her to guess what these people had in common, though he already knew the answer. Cecilia narrowed her eyes, conjuring a fireball in her hand and hurling it at Ian. The fireball exploded on impact, but to Cecilia's surprise, the flames were extinguished by some unknown force. Ian's suspicions were confirmed: Cecilia was indeed a Coldwalker. Before she could react, Ian calmly explained that he had come here because he had predicted she would seek him out. No sooner had the words left his mouth than dozens of ice shards shot towards Cecilia. Her eyes widened in horror as they came closer. Ian Page moved his hand, casting an ice spear spell, causing Cecilia to tense up. Quickly, she summoned a mana barrier in front of her for protection. She could feel the pressure building, sweat starting to form on her brow as she gritted her teeth. Ian curled his fingers, conjuring a pyroblast ball, then hurled it directly at her. Cecilia realized she couldn't move with her mana barrier up, and the overwhelming force of the blast meant she was likely going to die. The barrier began to crack under the intensity of the pyroblast, icy fragments from the attack slicing across her skin. Panic set in as she tried to run, only to be knocked off balance by the massive explosion. As she lay on the ground, she reassured herself that she was still alive. She thought to herself that since Ian had used up his mana with the pyroblast, he must be exhausted. She also realized that help would be coming soon, but there was no concrete evidence linking her to being a spy. The others wouldn't suspect her, especially not because of a child like Ian. As long as she healed herself first, she could deal with him later, and the magicians of the tower would trust her too. Ian approached with a smirk, revealing his plan. He intended to make a name for himself by selling her. Cecilia smirked back, asking if he really thought that would work. Ian's grin widened, confirming her suspicion. He then added that he had proof that neither she nor the Coldwalkers were aware of. Annoyed, Cecilia demanded to know what he was talking about. Just then, Captain Oliver Raywood arrived, flanked by others, and asked what had happened. 2 men rushed towards Cecilia, one of them kneeling to check on her wounds. Ian casually replied that he'd been the one who did it. Captain Oliver Raywood, now looking to understand the situation, asked Ian to explain himself. Ian claimed that he had seen Cecilia talking to someone wearing a mask, and then, out of nowhere, she had tried to kill him. Cecilia, her voice filled with anger, yelled at Ian, demanding to know what he was saying. Ian, unfazed, informed them that it was because of that encounter that he had attacked her in self-defense. Captain Oliver Raywood, not easily convinced, asked Ian if that was truly the reason for his actions. Ian nodded, reaffirming that it was a matter of survival. Raywood then asked Ian to prove his claim. Ian explained that he had seen Cecilia and the masked figure searching their bodies and marking them. Raywood immediately ordered his guards to search Cecilia. Panic gripped Cecilia as the men who had accompanied her stepped forward to intervene. One of them protested, reminding Captain Raywood that Cecilia was a magician from the ivory tower and questioning the necessity of searching her body. Raywood unsheathed his sword, holding it in front of the men as a warning. He declared that Crown Prince Hayden Green River was present, and everything that had happened was witnessed in his presence. Whether or not the tower magicians were involved, they all had a duty to uncover the truth. The protesting man raised his hands in surrender, pleading with Captain Raywood to allow them to heal Cecilia first before proceeding with the investigation. Raywood, without hesitation, turned away, stating that the healing could come after the examination. His female guards then took charge, examining Cecilia's body. Once the examination was complete, Captain Raywood asked his female guards if they had found anything suspicious on Cecilia. The guards reported that there was nothing out of the ordinary. The two men accompanying Cecilia, still agitated, yelled at Captain Raywood, demanding to know how he could suspect her. They insisted she needed to be healed immediately. Raywood, however, turned his attention to Ian and asked if he had been lying. Ian shook his head, denying the accusation. Then, with a smirk, he approached Cecilia, apologizing, and placed his glowing fingers on the back of her neck. The group watched in shock as a mana seal mark appeared on Cecilia's nape. Furious, Cecilia glared at Ian, demanding to know what he had done. Ian smirked again, revealing that he had been curious about what she was doing with the masked figure. Now, it seemed like they had been checking for this very mark. Ian's mind briefly wandered back to the past, recalling how cold walkers were sent to training schools with such marks, which they weren't aware of, only their managers knew about them. Ian himself had only learned the truth after a year of interrogating a manager. Back in the present, Captain Raywood, turning to the group, asked if anyone knew what the mark meant. One man replied that it was his first time seeing it. Captain Raywood asked Ian the same question, and Ian answered, admitting it was the first time he had seen such a mark as well. Captain Raywood, though, didn't let the uncertainty of its meaning deter him. He recognized that the mark itself was still a form of evidence. He ordered Cecilia to be healed first and promised that they would interrogate her afterward. He instructed his men to prepare a mana prison, and they acknowledged his order. Turning to Ian, Captain Raywood added that if everything turned out to be true, the Emperor would reward him. Sitting on the sofa, Crown Prince Hayden Green River asked Captain Oliver Raywood to confirm whether a child like Ian had really defeated a third-class magician from the Ivory Tower. Oliver Raywood confirmed the question. Hayden laughed, surprised by the news, saying that he never expected a child to possess such skill. He then asked Oliver what he thought about Ian. Captain Oliver Raywood replied that, according to the magicians who had been dispatched, it seemed true. Ian's behavior and speech were far beyond that of a typical child. Hayden Green River, intrigued, told Oliver that he believed he should meet Ian and speak with him personally before forming any conclusions. He then ordered Oliver to bring Ian to him. After some time, Ian stood before Crown Prince Hayden Green River. He bowed his head respectfully and asked why he had been called. Hayden rose from the sofa, looking down at Ian. He explained that, from what he had heard, one of the magicians sent by the Ivory Tower was actually a spy from Coldwood and that she was quite a skilled magician. Hayden praised Ian, telling him that he believed his achievement in capturing Cecilia was significant. Ian, flattered, replied humbly. Hayden continued, saying he would like to reward Ian for his efforts and asked what Ian wanted. Ian realized that Hayden was trying to gauge his true desires with this question. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should share his wishes. Ultimately, he decided to be open. Ian looked up at Crown Prince Hayden Green River and said that, if it was possible, he would like to visit the site of the old Ivory Tower on the path to the Imperial Castle. Hayden raised an eyebrow, asking why Ian would want to go there since there wasn't much to see. Ian replied that he had only heard stories about the place and had always wanted to see it for himself. Hayden assumed Ian simply wanted to visit a historical site, dismissing it as a childish desire. He thought to himself that Ian was still just a kid. After a moment, he agreed, telling Ian that he would take him there. Ian smirked internally, realizing he could get what he wanted far sooner than expected. He recalled the old ivory tower site and the item hidden deep beneath it from his past life, the dragon language book, which had been crucial to time magic research. He remembered finding it just a few years before his death, only managing to comprehend a small portion of it. Ian wondered how much more he could understand in this life. Later, on their way to the site of the old ivory tower, Lady Page looked out of the carriage window with excitement before turning to Ian and saying that this was her first time venturing out this far. Ian smiled and agreed. Ratho, seated nearby, told Lady Page that once they reached the capital, he would serve as their guide, revealing that despite his appearance, he had been living in the capital for a long time, making a living through alchemy. Lady Page smiled and thanked him. Ian looked at Raphael with confusion, not quite understanding his intentions. Just then, Vice Captain Paul, the second Imperial Knight, knocked on the carriage window to inform Ian that they had arrived. He told them that they would be staying for 2 days, per Crown Prince Hayden Green River's orders, and that they were free to explore the area during that time. Paul then invited everyone to follow him, as he would guide them to their lodging. As they walked through the village, the locals greeted Crown Prince Hayden Green River warmly. One man stepped forward, saying it was an honor to have Hayden visit such a humble village and that it would be remembered for tens of thousands of generations. Hayden chuckled lightly, downplaying the honor, saying it wasn't a big deal. Ian observed Hayden carefully and realized that the prince treated the common citizens with genuine kindness. He remembered that in his past life, Hayden always wore a dark and hostile expression, especially when Ragnar was by his side. Now Ian saw Hayden smiling, and he understood that Hayden made those cold expressions only toward those outside the nobility. He began to understand why the emperor favored the first prince. As they walked, Douglas called out to Ian, asking when they would be going to the old ivory tower. Ian asked him why he was so curious. Douglas explained that he wanted to visit as well. Ian, after a brief pause, decided that he would visit the underground areas at dawn. He told Douglas that they would go together tomorrow when they had the time. Douglas, visibly excited, thanked Ian profusely. Seeing the two of them talking, Ratho noticed how much Douglas seemed to have taken a liking to Ian. He turned to Lady Page and asked if Ian had always been this mature, as he found it hard to believe that Ian was only 12. Lady Page responded that Ian had matured far earlier than most children because he was naturally caring and kind, much like his father. She added that although Ian never said it, she knew he was trying to fill the void left by his father's absence, and she felt sorry for him. Raphael nodded, understanding that Ian was a lot like his father. He then asked Lady Page if her husband had been a magician as well. She shook her head and explained that Fran, her husband, was not a magician, but an ordinary man. She continued, telling Raphael that Fran had gone missing before Ian was born, after leaving for work one day. His belongings were returned home 5 years later, but Fran himself never returned. Lady Page began to say something about Ian but then stopped abruptly, brushing it off as nothing. Ian walked across the yellow grass, his mind drifting back to his past life, a journey carried by the wind and the road of stars. It had felt like an endless path after the Unification War, far removed from the Ivory Tower and the Emperor. At first, he had wondered if his entry into the Ivory Tower back then had been nothing more than a coincidence, but soon he realized it was not mere chance. Something had guided him toward that fate. As he glanced at the familiar castle before him, the same one he had seen in his past life, he noticed that it still looked the same, unchanged by the years. He recalled the Great War that had occurred 300 years ago between the magicians of the Ivory Tower and the Dragonians, descendants of dragons. The Gargoyle army, along with the dark magic of the Dragonians, had been powerful enough to obliterate the empire. Yet, it was the Imperial Prince Mitchell Green River, a high-class magician, who had led the other magicians to victory, defeating the Dragonians and wiping out the Gargoyles, thereby preserving the empire's peace. After the war, Mitchell Green River, who had guided them to victory, refused the position of emperor and instead became the tower owner, building a new tower in the capital, Green River. Ian now understood how this place had become a ruin, abandoned by the people over time. Approaching a certain spot, Ian wondered if this was the place. He placed his fingers on the stone, and as his fingertips made contact, they began to glow. Suddenly, a staircase appeared before him. Slowly, he descended, summoning a light spell into his palm. The light illuminated the head of a gargoyle statue. Ian's gaze fixed on the statue as he remembered the surprise he had felt when he had first seen it. Then, without warning, the gargoyle broke free from its stone form with a deafening roar, groaning as it locked its eyes on Ian. Ian gritted his teeth, stunned that a gargoyle, thought to have been extinct for 300 years, was hiding here. The gargoyle roared again and leapt at him. Instinctively, Ian formed an ice ball and hurled it at the creature. The ice struck the gargoyle with force, sending it crashing into the wall. Ian realized that in his past life, he could have easily killed the gargoyle, but now, in his current state, he had to exert more effort. The gargoyle groaned as it leapt toward Ian once again. Without hesitation, Ian cast an ice spear spell, sending sharp ice fragments flying toward the gargoyle's body. He then raised his fingers, summoning a powerful lightning spell. The explosion of electricity finally finished off the gargoyle. Ian stood over the lifeless body, muttering to himself that he had taken care of the gargoyle, so now he awaited the passage to appear. As if on cue, the ground in front of him shifted, revealing a hidden path. Ian looked down and smiled, recognizing it as the same passage from his past life. He picked up his fallen cloak, wrapped it around his shoulders, and carefully stepped forward. Soon, he came upon a table where a dragon language book rested. Smiling, he remarked to himself that he had found it much sooner than he had expected. Approaching the book, he wondered whether it had been hidden here by a dragon or if it was the work of the first magician. He reached for it, remembering how mysterious the dragon language had been. Even in his past life, he had been unable to fully comprehend it. If only he could understand it now, he thought. But when he opened the book, he was shocked to find it empty. Confused, he wondered what had happened. Then it dawned on him, it might be because he had already used the book in his past life. Ian closed the book, feeling a pang of disappointment. He longed to reread the dragon's language to decipher the secrets it held. He tried to speak, but no sound escaped his lips. Realizing this, Ian stared at the book and understood, the dragon's language wasn't merely spoken with the voice. It was a magical language that drew its power from mana. In that moment, Ian realized that without the dragon's language, which had now disappeared, he could no longer use time magic. Without it, he couldn't return to the past. A heavy sigh escaped him as he closed his eyes in disappointment. He had been hoping to have the ability to endlessly turn back time, but now he understood how dangerous it could have been if he hadn't discovered this limitation. His second life had just become a lot more difficult to navigate. The carriage rolled through the bustling streets of the city, drawing closer to the horizon. Ian was informed that they would soon reach the capital of Green River. He glanced out the window, realizing that they were finally entering the capital and that he needed to stay alert. He couldn't shake the thought that if Cecilia were to flee and meet up with another Cold Walker, the Coldwood Empire would start keeping a closer eye on him. He knew Cecilia would undoubtedly speak about him, causing complications in numerous ways. His thoughts shifted when a group of magicians blocked their path. Captain Oliver Raywood dismounted from his horse and demanded to know by whose authority they stopped Crown Prince Hayden Green River. The leading magician responded that it was by the order of Emperor Terry Green River. He explained that a command paper had been issued, transferring all authority over Cecilia and related matters to the Ivory Tower. Oliver retorted that the magician must have been in a rush to receive the command even before the spy had arrived. The magician smiled, closed his eyes, and said that urgent matters should be addressed quickly. He then informed Oliver that the Ivory Tower would take full responsibility from here on out. Oliver clenched his jaw and insisted the magician hand over the sinner to the tower leader. The magician glared back, saying that Cecilia wasn't a sinner yet, as the truth was still unknown. He reminded Oliver that Cecilia was still a magician of the Ivory Tower and warned him to choose his words carefully. Oliver gritted his teeth and turned away. Meanwhile, the other guards muttered angrily, complaining about how the magicians were swooping in to take Cecilia, even though it was they who had risked everything to capture her. One guard grumbled that it was unfair and that he wouldn't accept it, even if it was an order from the Emperor. Ian understood their frustration. He knew the magicians weren't trying to protect Cecilia, they simply didn't want knights questioning one of their own. He realized they planned to lock her away in the deepest, most secure part of the Ivory Tower's prison and smooth things over behind closed doors. Even if Cecilia were a spy for Coldwood, there was no way she would escape from that prison. Lady Page peered out from the carriage, curious about what was going on. Ian reassured her, telling her not to worry. But as his thoughts turned, a messenger interrupted, informing him that Crown Prince Hayden Green River wished to make a brief stop before heading to the Imperial Palace. As the carriage arrived at a mansion, Ian stepped out and looked up at the building. A wave of recognition hit him. It was the same mansion he received from Ragnar after reaching the 5th-class rank in his past life. Hayden Green River asked Ian if he liked it and explained that this mansion was personally granted to him by Emperor Terry Green River. Ian bowed his head in gratitude, replying that he was immeasurably indebted. Hayden chuckled and told Ian not to be so formal. Ian recalled that in his past life, he was 26 when he received this mansion, but this time he had received it 14 years earlier. He responded by complimenting the mansion. Hayden then mentioned that, for now, his family would stay here, but Ian must accompany him to the Imperial Palace to greet Emperor Terry Green River, as they were now in the capital. Ian politely asked Hayden if he might take a moment to look around the mansion with his mother first. Hayden granted him permission with a smile, and Ian thanked him warmly. Ian walked through the mansion with his mother, Lady Page. He asked if she liked it, telling her that this would be their new home. Lady Page, stunned, asked again to confirm if this was truly their house. Ian smiled and reassured her. He remembered that in his past life, his mother had already passed away by the time he received this mansion. Lady Page gazed around in awe, commenting that the place was even more impressive than the Lord's castle. Ian thought back, realizing that no matter how powerful he had become in his past life, he could never bring his mother back from the dead. He responded that the mansion was intended for royalty. As he looked around, Ian felt a sense of satisfaction. Everything he once wished to do for his mother and with her was now within reach.